Hello and welcome to Deep In Pact, a proud member of the Duff Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most shortest work, 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
That's a good little pause, but our audio software is going to cut it out, Elliot, I'm afraid. We are here to talk about Judgment 16.6, but before we do that, are you aware that we're about to do a 24-hour live stream? And not just because it's a stupid idea, but for charity.
Yeah, which is the good part of the idea.
Yeah.
There's a link in the show notes under this episode. We can get all the details on what that charity is and all the kinds of wacky stuff we're going to get up to for 24 hours to try and raise some money for them.
Yes, we've got a whole bunch of segments. One that we'll tell you about today is Maggie's Madness, which is a segment kind of like a March's Madness, but with Maggie, where Maggie Holt is pitting all the characters of Pact against each other, and we have to decide who the winner would be. So we'll answer conclusively who's the best character in Pact.
Yes, and of course we'll be relying on the audience at that time to help us. And actually not just the audience, Scott Daly from We've Got Ward, who is a bit of an expert, having run March's Madness last year, is stepping in to help us manage the brackets as we in the audience debate which character is best.
Yeah, and that's just one of many fun segments that we'll be doing. So check out the schedule if you want to see more, and let's get into the episode.
Let's do it.
So, Judgment 16.6, the group has just escaped to run through some fire to get away from some demons, and they're kind of collecting themselves after their narrow escape. Rose is kind of filling in some of the gaps about, hey, what the heck's going on?
Literally, because there's gaps everywhere.
Yes.
I mean, I love the very sort of, like, the way this chapter starts by taking a step back and Rose is just sort of observing the place. Like, it's really well written. This is a chapter that I think was really about establishing this battlefield that is presumably going to be where the ultimate final boss fight takes place. And, you know, Rose already starts to notice that there's something weird about the clouds and the sky above it, which is seeding this really fun idea in our mind. But the bit that really captured my imagination the most here was just how Rose notes the highway is still cutting through town. Cars and trucks are just going along it, and nobody's noticing a thing, and it really sets this tone of how alone our goodies are here. Like, because they're the ones who are already kind of under the thumb of the lawyers in Barbatorum, it permeates this sense of no one's coming to help you. Nobody else knows or cares about what's going on here.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it feels like the scale of this problem kind of feels world-ending, but it's actually not. And that's kind of what this is reminding us of, right? It's not, the world isn't ending, it's your world is ending.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like, I think that's what I really like about this finale is Pact has always just dealt with a little corner of this world, and it would be a bit over the top, I think, if it was suddenly all of existence is under threat. And so what we've got is kind of, there is this larger concept of all of existence is under threat by the demons.
Yes.
But our climactic battle is still just stopping them taking one small parcel of the world. And so it's still epic and big in that way because it's part of a bigger puzzle, like this fight that they're fighting, but it's not the whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I quite like that we've kind of scoped our stakes down a little bit at the start of this chapter, even though it still feels very life or death.
Yeah, well, and it, you know, as you said before, it's their world falling apart. Like, it still matters so much to everyone we know, because especially since Toronto got brought in, it's all of their lives that are at stake.
It kind of feels like it makes it more insidious. Like, if Rose dies here, it's not, the world isn't going to end. Like, it's not going to be she's not going to get the kind of gratification of everyone suffering because they didn't help her out. Everything's going to basically just continue but be kind of shittier, and it's like it feels like it makes it more insidious to me, which I like.
Yeah, and isn't that just so perfect for this story? Like, it's just really good. And I really like the way this highway kind of gets you thinking along those lines as the chapter opens up.
Yeah. Another weird thing, I guess, that happens at the start of this chapter is the group kind of starts talking about Isadora, and they seem to come away with it with the understanding of, like, yeah, she might bounce back from this bout of madness. Obviously, it affected her harder than everyone else, but she might bounce back. And I mean, like, yeah, true, but they left her, like with the demons, right? I don't like that's not the problem. The bouncing back from the madness isn't really her biggest problem right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like, if somebody gets like shot, so you put them behind enemy lines, and it's like hopefully they'll recover from the bullet wound, and it's like that's not their problem anymore. Yeah, she I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm keen to see whatever Isadora is next time we check in with the people in the church.
Do you think that's a series wrap on Isadora?
I not conceptually, because I think Paige will probably have to deal with it, assuming she makes it out. I don't know. I'm sure we'll see something. I don't know how Isadora's going to be doing. Maybe this will be good for her. A bit of madness to work inside
to chill her out.
Yeah, work inside that order and kind of stop her being so by the books.
Yeah.
Like her. This is a very quick version of like a buddy cop comedy where like you've got the straight by the books Isadora and like this reckless demon. And they meet in the middle.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what's going to happen.
But yeah, so obviously the other thing they talk about is how the visions they were having when like the screaming demon from last chapter was going.
Yeah.
Those are still there a little bit, and Rose thinks it might actually be another demon or something who was doing it, but yeah, I mean, obviously what's going on here is Jacob's Bell is being torn apart at the seams a bit, which they think will make it easier for the lawyers or Barbatorum to do whatever they want to do, which is something we get some more clues towards later in the chapter.
Yeah. So Mag sends Evan ahead to scout under a bridge. And we don't really understand what's going on until suddenly Evan lights up and goblins just appear. And Mag's just like freaks out at them for trying to ambush her on tonight of all nights.
Yeah, it had real like angry mum vibes to me.
Like she's disappointed in them for it.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said there. I kind of pegged this, like, I think this bridge has been established as a goblin den so concretely in the book. Like, it was in Signature, and then it even came up in the Faisal/Johanna's interlude at the end of Arc 14. So it's just like the moment they were like at the highway bridge and it's like, hey, Evan, could you just go and like light a fire under that bridge? I was like, eat shit, you dumb goblins. And I mean, it works out exactly how you want it to. Like, I think that's the best thing about goblin humor is 80% of it is just kind of exactly where you think things are going to go, and it still just works because they're such incessant assholes at it.
Yeah, it works so well. And so, we get some goblin humor, but also Mags binds these goblins, and it makes me think, like, this whole arc has been them losing their resources piece by piece. And suddenly they've got this small, like, gain in resources, which is just a handful of shitty goblins. And I'm so excited for them to play some integral role in winning the day.
I mean, I guess with Rose piloting the ship, I would be worried for their sakes about just being pawns, as Blake would put it. They're the expendables.
True. I mean, they're expendable, but they'll be expended, like, beating these demons, which is a noble end.
Yeah. I mean, again, it seems like they're going to be making that call for the goblins, which...
True.
But also they're goblins. It's hard to land on the exact morality of this when goblins are goblins, but yeah, I think the introduction of these goblins and sort of the humor around them really emphasized to me how clever Wildbow's been about having like multiple sources of humor he can play off of. Like, particularly in this chapter, we've got the goblins. Peter also has his moments. Evan has some great moments, especially with Green Eyes. And it's this way, like, Wildbow can now have little bits of humor multiple times in the chapter and cut through bits of tension, but it's also not... It doesn't feel overdone. Like, you can imagine if it was Evan every time, or Peter every time, or the goblins every time, and it was happening 3 to 4 times a chapter, it'd start to grind on you a bit, that it's like, why is Peter still doing this? Why is Evan? So the way they sort of all kind of take turns, I think, is really clever.
Yeah, you're right. It's a good way to set up to keep levity while not making it so blatantly obvious that we're just hitting some comedic beats to mix it up a bit.
Yeah, well, and not just that, it also gives those characters room to have beats that are non-comedic. Like if
Yes,
Peter
true.
was the only source of comedic beats, it would be really hard to slip in the non-comedic ones. Whereas, because they're all taking turns balancing the comedy, they also get to do other stuff. Like Peter has a bit of a genuine moment, as close as he's going to get probably to a genuine moment with Paige
Yeah.
before this over Isadora, and there's room for that because other people are taking up the slack with being funny as well.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's this other funny bit you alluded to Evan and Green Eyes' conversation where they're kind of, poking light fun at each other. And that conversation ends in the text with Rose ignoring the rest of it, which is so annoying because this is exactly what I want. I just want more Evan and Green Eyes banter. And of course, Rose just tunes it out.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that jumped out to me about this was, do you remember when Blake used to do that to human conversations?
Yes,
I think it was in Arc 13. So, yes, I agree. I'm pissed off at Rose because I always enjoy Evan and Green Eyes banter, but at the same time, this seems like a good sign to me because we definitely saw it as not a good sign when Blake was like, human conversations, boring. So the fact that Rose is leaning more towards the human side, maybe good thing is too good, but it's better than what Blake was doing in Arc 13. That's a low bar. But yeah, like, I don't know. She then actually goes through the party that she's amassed and she kind of points out, all the humans are my allies. She doesn't say it in these words, but if you look at all the names she lists off, she basically says,
Yes.
the humans are my allies. And Blake has all the others.
Yeah.
And then Mags is kind of in the middle, which is just perfect because she's the ambassador, but she's also like holding herself together through this role of ambassador and presumably lost a lot of herself, so she isn't quite human, probably.
Yeah, and she's obviously got quite strong ties to Blake as well, which I think makes Rose a bit uneasy about calling Mags her ally.
But I think that's why it worked. Like, it fits into this metaphor because Mags is kind of halfway between Blake and Rose. And it's not just because she's the ambassador, but it's also because she is kind of halfway between human and other. It's great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's good. You're right. It is this. It's interesting. Rose is setting herself up as ally to the humans, even though she's really bad at being human, I guess.
Well, I mean, Blake made her better at it, right? Like, I guess that's part of the thing is Blake has improved her on that front. Like, I wonder if this scene might have played out differently if Blake had never possessed her.
Yeah. So the group gets to Johannes's, I suppose, domain, and finds it as this very weird, kind of detached astrological space.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, it's awesome, isn't it? Before we get to that, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the idea that Rose also notes that she still has some Blake tattoos on her, although they're very faded, which is kind of confirmation of Blake, either intentionally or unintentionally doing something similar to Conquest, where he doesn't fully give up all the ground that is ceded to him.
Yeah, like, that's basically what Rose says here, is she's like, he hasn't quite gone all the way back in his hole. And she speculates a little bit on why he might have done this.
Yeah.
And, both explanations of, he can't because it would damage us more, or maybe he just doesn't want to. Like, I think both of those are conceivable. In fact, since it's Pact, it probably is both. But, I mean, this just gets, my hopes up even higher that we're going to get to see some actual Blake soon, which is nice.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's done the same thing to Green Eyes, too. Because she noticed the shit out of this as well, which was very on brand.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about this Barber domain, right? So the thing that I kept noticing is there's no atmosphere, and this kind of manifests a few ways. People have this keep bringing up like, it feels like I can't breathe properly, or Green Eyes mentions that smell and sound aren't traveling the same, things like that. So it feels like there's like no atmosphere where they are. There's no stars. There's these huge like planet-esque things above them. It's very like primordial Earth vibe.
Yeah, but primordial Pact Earth vibe, because like I think the thing here is like physics is just a little broken. Like there's this, there's these giant things that are planet-sized, but also they're not planets. And if you look at them, they start to move into your eyeballs or something. And it's just kind of like it's there's no science here basically.
Yes, and so these big planet things that aren't planets, to me, those are demons, right? Like, this is what a demon looks like in its purest form before it was kind of contextualized by human. Maybe that's not 100% supported, but the fact that they're not planets and they also, like, infect your eyes, which is a very demon thing to do, made me think that this is what is being said, that this is... The Barber has kind of... Johannes wanted things to go back to the good old days, and the Barber wants them to go back to the Barber's version of the good old days, which is when demons were around and humans weren't.
Yeah, I didn't get that read, but I can see it. I sort of more had this idea of it as, this is just what the primordial Pact Earth was like, and things were just a bit more fluid. And like, that obviously aligns with the idea of these things being a bit more demonic, because, yeah, as you mentioned, like, the concepts were simpler back then of, demon versus angel,
yes.
presumably. So, that line between it just being a primordial Pact space and it being a demon may be a little bit blurry, even.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, I mean, this is just the best idea. Like, I think we just need to take the step back from, like, the because I'd love to talk about, like, the whole physics of it. Like, is science a human invention and part of our change in the Pactverse? Like, did science just not exist and we invented it by trying to create rules? I could probably talk about that for hours, but what we probably should talk about is just how perfect this is, as, like, we've just established how humans and as agents of change have been so impactful on this world, and really, like, made it what it is and given us a shot. Yeah. And for our final battle, we stepped into a place that has had that mostly stripped away.
Yes.
It's gone back to the way things used to be, and kind of, so it's like the advantage humans had is kind of gone. And we see this manifest literally when a lot of the practitioners can barely practice for various reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And it is, I mean, again, of course, it's another perfect manifestation of, fighting against the grain of the old systems, right? We've basically fought our way backwards through time against each of the old systems that existed. Now, this is, of course, the oldest, which is demons are here, fuck you.
This is making Mara look like a real scrub.
If only Mara had realized. Basically, her and the Barber are 100% aligned on what they want to happen.
I mean, to be fair, she wasn't really fighting against him that much for most of it, so she may have realized that.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing. I mean, she was in this continent. Well, she was like the first person to these areas, right? That was sort of her thing. So she maybe saw a patch of Earth that was closer to this.
Yeah, true.
When she first arrived.
I like that.
But yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I really want to talk about here is, as well, like, this transformation from what Johannes' domain was, because as a place that now represents kind of the world without humanity, I think that's so perfect for what Johannes' domain was, which was both simultaneously something that was celebrating the power of humanity while also kind of removing them.
Yes.
And so it's like that imagery of someone celebrating humanity by trying to, let others recreate the good old days has just been flipped completely on its head and had that humanity stripped out of it, just like Johannes has.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. The fact that Johannes is now just a husk of what he once was, and this is like a bastardization of his vision as well, is quite fun.
Yeah, yes, that's a great way of phrasing it.
Yeah. So the group comes across a genie, which has been basically brutally murdered by Barbatorum, and then also a giant.
Yeah, they've been like smited.
Yes.
In the various sort of, like, I just pictured this like the show Supernatural, like the way the angels smite things, where it's just this blackened scar on the ground around them.
Yeah.
And like I really enjoyed this because we haven't seen anything in the domain up until this point, and I was kind of wondering where all the chopped up like things were, and then you see this, and it sort of got me to lower my guard because I was like, okay, so for some reason he's just
killed them.
Yeah, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. So I was like confused, and that confusion tore me away from thinking, where are all the half like vestige others? And of course, just in time for them all to show up.
Yeah, we'll get to those vestige others in a bit, but I want to think about why these two have been smote instead of halved, right? I think there's a few possibilities. I think one that feels the most resonant is they're strong enough that they are able to resist the Barber, and obviously like, others and demons aren't aligned, right? Like, I don't think an other, especially like a genie who seems to be more on the sentient side, or even an ogre, would want to align itself with a demon. And so it kind of feels like these others were powerful enough to have a chance at resisting, and so Barber just fucking smote them, you know?
Yeah, I think there's even more to it than that. I think, like, as you mentioned, like, the Jinn wasn't a Sphinx basically described as a bit of an artificial Jinn? Like, they're similar in ways. And I think, yeah, you're right. I think he would have been. I think a Jinn would have been less inclined to work with the Barber, and that's part of it. But also, there may have been less for the Barber to carve up like he would have wanted. Like,
Interesting.
Again, these aren't completely separate concepts, but if you look at the thing, like the giant, I don't know if it's the same giant we saw before who had the pet dragon, but like, assuming it might be, if you think about the giant being killed and the dragon not, it's because the dragon was just this sort of, more of a machine.
Yeah, much more animalistic.
Yeah, and so it's much easier for the Barber to sort of chop it up into two rage halves like he does with the ogre we're about to see. Whereas with the giant, maybe he would have ended up with something a bit more Blake and Rose-esque, like, so he gets less out of chopping up something that isn't already shit. And obviously he needed sacrifices for this diagram he's building, but we'll get to that in a sec.
Yes, I think that's probably it. I think it's
probably all of the above. It's like he needed some sacrifices, these guys gave him less to work with, and they were more likely to try and fight him either way. So it's like, well, you're dead.
Yeah, it's not worth it. I mean, from a tactical perspective, this isn't the worst thing that could have happened.
Yeah. Although, as you mentioned, the dragon hasn't shown up. I don't want to see what he could have done to the dragon.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine.
But wait, yeah, you're right. Having rage monster genies running around would be worse. I'm glad that's not a thing. I just had a thought. I want to jump in. Didn't the genies as well? They very explicitly dealt with the structure of things, didn't they? Like, remember that genie had the glass and it morphed it back into shape. So I wonder if that they were just more opposed to Barbatorum as things, like, just speaking why even a powerful genie, he didn't want to slice a little bit out and then kill the remainder. There was almost nothing to work with because they're so diametrically opposed to what he represents as a demon of ruin.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I like that as well. That's another good explanation for it, I think. So the group gets approached by an ogre, and they're kind of like, what's up with this? Then they notice another ogre, and of course these two ogres are bisected halves of an old hole. And these ogres are making enough noise to draw a basic horde of bisected zombie others that come after them.
Yeah, exactly. And so I want to take a second here to quickly talk about what the ogres sort of hint to us about what the Barber is up to, because it does seem like the Barber has a plan.
Yeah.
And based on my understanding and fitting in with the gaps we saw outside the domain at the start of the chapter, it kind of seems like the Barber is looking to expand Johannes's Funland. God knows by how much.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's going to be fun. I guess they're going to have to stop the Barber from claiming even more land. Yeah. Which kind of, this just totally proves Rose right as well. Like, Elder Sister's going on and saying, we could just leave and give you, and let the Barber continue. And it's like, no, see, look, this fucker's planning to expand this place. Like, Rose is 100% correct. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't just ignore these problems.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the only thought I had here was, we saw that, the rest of Jacob's Belt became more vulnerable to the Abyss as they chopped it up. So, maybe the hope here, like, this is where the Abyss can come in as an influence or a character even in the end here, is if the Abyss is fighting the domain for claim of, like, Jacob's Bell, like, they're going to be fighting to push Jacob's Bell into the Abyss.
Yeah.
Rather than let the domain have it. I think that could be really fun. So it's like, just there's like, same as like what we had with the contest for lordship, where everyone changed their minds at one point. It's like now everyone's going to be like, oh, quick, shit, we have to shove everything into the Abyss, quick.
Yeah, that contest for Lord of Jacob's Bell has really gone downhill.
Well, I mean, it eventually reached the point where Rose and Alistair are like, oh, okay, we'll do it.
Yeah, I guess we'll take it.
Yeah, and we declare it derelict and let's kill it. That was their first act as joint lords of the town.
Their first and only act.
I mean, well, technically, she's still the lord, isn't she? Her and Alistair. I mean, they didn't get round to giving that up, did
Yeah,
they?
true. I guess they need to sink it first.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's touch on the fact that Barbatorum has basically, industrialized his ability to cut things in half. He didn't just do it individually like we saw him do in the library. He's just done a big old ritual, presumably with the energy from killing the giant and the djinn, and, halved everything in the domain all at once.
Yeah, well, I got the impression as well, obviously, since it's now his domain, it's like his essence leaking into the space. So it's not just the ritual, but it's just that's what this place is like now. Rose calls it out as specifically designed for altering vestiges, which is maybe not good for her and Blake. I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
I had this fun thought around this where Blake and Rose have changed what the barber did by trading traits. And maybe that'll be something, maybe if he's not there might be this moment where they get away with something because they don't work like the barber might expect.
Yeah, the barber expects Rose to not connect with people, for example.
Yeah, exactly. There might be some moment where Rose does something the barber doesn't predict because Blake has been kind enough to give her all these aspects.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, this is something we were just talking about before recording, but a sort of extension of this idea was we've heard so much in this story about how, you can't repair what demons destroy. The destruction is permanent. And it made me wonder if humans are this third agency, can you maybe not undo what a human has changed completely? So if Rose and Blake have changed themselves after what the barber did, the barber may not just be able to undo it as easily. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how this would manifest in this instance, but just maybe this idea I'm having of part of the reason humans are taking over, and we've seen it with the angels as they're losing this battle. It's like you can't just put things back to the way they were because what humans have changed isn't completely able to be set back to the way it was.
Yeah, it can't be undone. You can change things again and change them towards it maybe, but it will never be kind of a straight undo of it.
Yeah, and there's maybe some angelic equivalent where once a concept is created, it cannot be completely destroyed. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. I like this idea of maybe because this might be the downfall of Barbatorum, as if he's looking to extend this domain, which is trying to put things back the way they were in a very primitive sense, maybe the demons are going to have to learn that you can't just go right back to the way they were because what humans change can't just be unchanged.
Yeah, interesting. Potentially that will come into our final few chapters here.
We'll see.
So the group kind of is running and trying to get away from this horde of vestiges that are chasing them. Lola pulls some tricky magic to basically teleport the group by yanking on a connection so hard that it yanks them along with it, and they are pulled away from danger for now. Of course, they will still be tracked by the demons, by the lawyers, I should say.
Yeah, we actually haven't mentioned that thing until now, but kind of all throughout this chapter, there's been a bloodhound demon lawyer chasing after them, and he almost catches them at this point.
Yes, but they escape, and we see some familiar faces as the mouse children come out of hiding, and Mags kind of starts interacting with them.
Yeah, I didn't actually expect to see these guys again, but when it happened, I was like, oh, of course. This is great. It ties into sort of, the human element. I was just talking about how all the humanity was taken out of this place, but that's not true. Here's some. And of course, it's going to play off Rose fantastically. It already starts to this chapter, but I imagine there'll be more of that next chapter as kind of Rose has to look at them and look at some vestiges that have had their, gaps filled with mice and dogs and whatever else.
Yeah, it's interesting to think, not only is it a good chance for Rose to reflect, but also it's interesting, I think it'll be interesting to see as an example of what does it look like when the barber tries to do stuff to what is already basically a vestige, which obviously has implications for how the barber will interact with Blake and Rose as well.
Yes, I mean, that was my other concern, is much like the goblins, these more pawns for Rose to sacrifice in her game.
Yeah.
I have a little more reservation about this being done to the vestiges than the goblins, which I don't know what that says about my moral code, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, Lola basically takes herself out of commission with this expansion of expenditure of power. So again, one less resource, but I guess we've got more resources in these mice children.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a net gain unless these mouse children have secret skills I don't know about. But yeah, I mean, you're right. That has been a bit of a.
They're doubly affected by panpipes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's been a theme, not just through the recent part of the story, but really the whole story is people's, like, you know, using up all the power that they've accumulated. And I wonder what this is going to do with Lola for the rest of this. Like, is she just going to have to hang out with Peter? Like, that's a fate worse than death. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what's done with Lola from here, because I think that'll be saying something about, you know, like all these other people like Jeremy and just this system in general, with which the Duchamps kind of emblemize in a way.
Yeah. But that's the end of our discussion on 16.6. It feels like we've wrapped up the first half of this arc, and now we're moving into the final half of the final arc.
Yeah, definitely. As I sort of touched on at the start, this was a chapter that was establishing the location that it feels like the next few chapters, or, you know, the rest of the arc. Even,
yeah, the rest of the story, some may say.
Based in. Yes, good point. Yeah, like, you know, they may leave again, but I feel like the layout of this place is going to be crucial for the end of the story.
Yeah,
I'd say.
Yeah.
And so you're right. This feels like the opening part to that segment.
Yeah. And we'll have to see how it continues next time. But before we wrap up our episode, it's time to revisit some of the answers that were left to our discussion question, which we were running, which was talking about, you know, what would happen if some others were injected with a bunch of magical energy, like Evan was injected with fire energy.
Yeah, and so we got some great answers to this one.
Yeah.
I wanted to start by pulling out the answer by All-Seeing Eye, number 70.
Yes.
Who was just talking about Fairy that had been, like, superpowered by the Abyss, which I think we saw mention of Fairy in the Abyss, but it didn't go into it much. And All-Seeing Eye was thinking about, like, if you gave tons of Abyss energy to Fairy and basically, you know, turn them into, like, super fairy boogeymen, how might that represent? And specifically focusing on the idea of, like, the fairy court, All-Seeing Eye came up with this idea of, like, a fairy traveling circus, like, as a traveling circus as a kind of modern changed twist on the court. And basically this circus would go around kind of kidnapping people and torturing them and testing them in much the same way the Abyss does, which was, like, a very fun idea in that kind of, like, way.
Yeah, it was a really cool idea and something that felt very thematic. I really loved the idea that All-Seeing Eye 70 brought up about this, like, anti-glamour powder, which was this glamour, the idea of glamour but infected with the Abyss, where instead of allowing you to change your appearance, it basically strips away characteristics and traits, and kind of has you lose your defining aspects until you eventually, of course, are not enough of a thing to exist and therefore fall into the Abyss.
Yeah. I also like thinking on it. I like the idea of anti-glamour being something that maybe reveals the ugly truths of things. And I'm not sure how consistently that would be able to manifest as something as awful as it would need to, but like, I could see anti-glamour being something that kind of strips away the meaning of stuff. I guess that's kind of what you and All-Seeing Eye were just talking about. But, like, yeah, just taking the concept of glamour and trying to invert it and make it something that's horrible in its own way was a very good idea.
Yeah, I thought that was very cool in All-Seeing Eye's answer. Another answer I really liked was from Lunix, who was who was basically talking about what would happen if Blake, as in, you know, Tree Blake form, was more heavily dosed up, I should say, on fear energy, which it basically takes what he was like in the Murdering the Duchamp Husbands arc and dials it up all the way.
Lunix's answer is basically, what if Arc 13, but 100 times more?
Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, he just like Lunix. I really like this answer. It just turns into Blake is the ultimate movie monster, rewarded for causing fear rather than actually doing damage.
Yes, and I loved it because there are a number of points in Lunix's answer where they basically did this classic Warbo style thing of, logicked their way to a classic trope. So the example I really liked was the hyena, if it gets juiced up with fear, maybe would cause people to panic. And of course, if people are panicking, they're more fearful and they make more mistakes, and therefore they're actually feeding Blake more. So of course, he wouldn't want to kill them. He would want to cut them a lot and let them just kind of panic themselves to death. And so now the obvious kind of extension of that is now Blake is a monster that kind of plays with his food in the way that horror movie monsters do, and doesn't just kill people outright. And it's so perfectly just is a sequence of logical steps that arrives at a trope that seems illogical but is explained in a really cool way.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved that. I also like the little idea of like if this happened to Blake, his form would continue to change, and obviously he became more tree as the Abyss got more hooks in him.
Yes.
So, like, Lunix started to wonder if Blake would become more tree than man, and I guess turn into, closer to a tree than an ant, I guess, but, like, one that still stabs you and stalks you.
Yeah. I really like that. Lunix also talked about the idea of Blake's motive probably being a kind of bastardization of his hunting the monsters, drive. And I love this again because it feels like a logical explanation for the kind of trope of the archetypal horror characters, right? Like the college student who is promiscuous, or the jock who's a bit of a bully, and these are things that Blake could, in a very heavily deformed state, see as like monstrous actions just because they're a bit shitty. And so these kind of misdemeanors in his eyes become reasons for murder.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've all read Arc 13. I could see that, reaching that point. Yeah,
it was a great answer. I loved it. Another one I really liked was Beard of Valor, who talked about, well, they kind of led into it with this thought of, like, practitioners and their familiars are probably warded, or at least kind of prepared for or expecting traditional vectors of attack, right? And so dosing something with a powerful dose of, like, emotional spirits is probably an interesting and non-traditional attack, which might make it useful. And they give the example of Hilda being hit with, like, a big dose of joy emotion as a way of kind of guarding yourself against Hilda, who is kind of quite ruthless and aggressive. And I think Beard of Valor basically talked about a number of different ways that this might manifest, which I think all seemed a bit wild and not necessarily helpful, but it was a fun idea and an interesting idea. And I think the best part of this response was basically just thinking about what would Hilda look like dosed up on joy, like flopping around like a happy, cute troll.
Yeah, a very wardish answer. In some ways, like this is obviously, I think emotion powers, spoilers are something that is fairly significant in Ward.
Yeah.
And it made me go there a little bit in my head.
Yeah, definitely.
So Hybum 7 takes Butt Sack and makes him worse by juicing him up on wind to create Fart Sack. Basically, the genesis of this idea, according to Sahibum, was the way Butt Sack showed that he could kind of catch wind. In 8.1, and so now rather than catching wind, he's giving it off, and the weaponized smells and other potential gas uses that you could get out of this was horrible to imagine.
Yes.
But I particularly liked Sahibum's line about how Evan is leaking, and much like a fart, so would Buttsack. He would slowly dissipate and become less potent over time. Which was a oddly poetic image given the topic.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It made me tear up. So in two ways. I like this. It was very on theme answer, and I could totally see like a less experienced goblin king or queen kind of infusing Buttsack with like the spirit of wind for some practical purpose. Like, I want Buttsack to be able to kind of jump up long distances or to be lighter to climb around, But of course, his goblinness just kind of manifests this wind spirit in the worst possible way. It's the exact kind of thing I could see happening to a goblin in Pact, which is why I really liked it.
Yeah, I agree.
I guess the final answer to talk about is one from Groby46578, who listed a number of possible ideas. One that I think came up a few times was the idea of Green Eyes with Earth turning into a kind of land shark, which is great because we already had Green Eyes tunneling around through the snow. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think Johansson
yes.
already sort of brought up the same answer in theirs, which is just imagining Green Eyes being able to use the ground like water basically and turning into a land shark. And yeah, it's like, I mean, it's horrifying. I love it.
It's a cool idea, and it plays off of Green Eyes already kind of tunneling through the snow and being great at like jumping out and catching people by surprise. Like, it's perfect. Also mentioned.
They I think both these users also briefly went into how they might imagine it would affect Green Eyes' appearance. I mean, horrifying ideas, but both very fun.
Yes, definitely. Groby also talked about the Faceless Woman infused with metal, which basically gives her knife hands, as well as a cool other bunch of stuff. And metal, I think, is a really interesting element in Pact, because it is the new kid on the block. And so Groby kind of goes into how this might impact Faceless Woman as a, new version of a boogeyman.
Yeah, like just this idea, I think that Groby talked about was a lot of implements actually have metal in them. Which is like a connection I don't think I'd made before, but I was like, yeah, they do. That's interesting. And so maybe the idea that, if the Faceless Woman was injected with metal, she might be immune to other metallic effects and maybe become immune to a lot of practitioners' workings.
Yeah.
Which is like a really cool idea. And Groby pointed out maybe you'd need to go and get someone like Mara or a very old school practitioner to try and take someone like this out.
Yeah, interesting. I like that. Yeah, there were a lot of really cool answers to this discussion question. It's the exact kind of one that I love. So thanks everyone for participating. And hey, we've got a new one coming up. And it's kind of a bit of an elephant that we wanted to talk about, because one of the things that was discussed about a lot about Pact right after it finished and as it was going on was the pacing, and how it is a story that, like many a Wildbow story, seems to go from bad to worse. But I think a lot of people were put off over the course of Pact by its pacing. And I want to kind of dive into that and use the discussion question as an opportunity to talk about it a bit. So the question is, what do you think of Pact's pacing? Has revisiting it again changed your opinion on it? Yeah. What are people thinking?
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you're one of the people who has somehow kept up the pace with us and not shot off ahead, and are reading it for the first time like me, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. People who are revisiting it, like, how does it compare? If you're keeping up with the podcast in time, does it make a difference? Like, I'm very interested to sort of learn. Like, I'd love to hear about people's experiences and how they read it, as well as how they feel about the pacing, so we can try and see if there's relationships there or something.
Yes, I know there are a few people who over the past, month or so basically started Pact to try and catch up with Deep Impact before it finished. And I'd be interested to hear from those people as well. How has that experience shaped your kind of thoughts about it?
Yes. Although, as we're saying this, I'm realizing, this will not be a particularly scientific discussion question, because if you've made it this far, you obviously can't hate the story.
Yes.
So, there's good.
If you've given up on Pact and you somehow hear this, leave an answer.
I think this will be really interesting to talk to people, because I have opinions on it that I guess we'll start to dive into next week, but I'm interested to hear other people's opinions to sort of help try and clarify mine a bit.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, if you have some thoughts on that discussion question and you want to leave them and participate in the conversation for next chapter, or just leave us your thoughts on the show in general, you can do that in our discussion thread, which will be linked in the show notes down below.
Yes, as we already mentioned, down the show notes below, you can also find the schedule for All Packed Up.
Yes.
There's a bunch of cool stuff in there. It's set to your time zone. You can still send us ideas for stuff to do. We're always looking for backup ideas or other fun challenges that we'll start to announce as it's coming up. So, yeah, I mean, let us know what you want.
Yeah, totally. If you would like to engage with the show, you can leave your thoughts in those discussion threads, or you can tweet at us. Our Twitter is @MediaMDPodcast. So head on over there, give us a follow, and tweet at us and see what happens. Who knows?
Yes. The other place we can be found is on doofmedia.com. I mean, we're not actually there, but there's stuff about us there.
Yeah, we're on there. We've got our photos and bios on there. That counts.
Yeah, exactly. And so all the details for all the other fantastic shows on the Doof Media Network.
Oh, yeah? Name some.
Okay, I will. We Want More is our newest baby. Or actually, it's not, because it's been going for a while, but it's just joined Doof, and we're very excited about that.
Yeah.
It's a great fit, and it gets to sit alongside the other new show on the network, which is obviously Matt and Scott's Kingslingers.
Yes, both great shows. And we've recently added 2 more shows to the Doof Media Network, and you know what that means? It means you're getting more bang for your buck. And so if you want to upgrade your amount of buck per bang, you can go to patreon.com/doofmedia. Because, of course, this is the way to... Shut up, Elliot. It sounded natural, okay? Just go with it. This is the way that you can support us. I mean, we do these shows because we have a great community that enjoys them. So if you want to be a part of that community, head on to patreon.com/doofmedia and get involved.
Yes. And, of course, Wildbo has a Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbo.
Yeah.
It's how he makes his living, and we need him to keep doing that so he'll keep writing. So if you can, spare some change, throw it his way.
Yeah, go do it. Because you need to take some time to do that, we'll be off for a few days, but don't worry, we'll be back for Judgment 16.7, and that will be on Friday, the 15th of Feb. So we'll see you then.
See ya.